Mr. Lamborn.
Okay, thank you. I've heard anecdotal stories from Colorado companies in my district who end up adding 5 to 10% to their costs simply due to the number of overseers that they have to support on an ongoing basis from DCAA and DCMA. How do we strike the right balance between oversight and efficiency in contract management for any one of you?
I think that's where we go to that threshold issue in terms of at what level do we go. And there have been some of the studies done in acquisition reform over the last 4 or 5 years that have tried to look at that topic. There was one that Norm Augustine had with Ben's Business Executives for National Security that I would recommend you take a look at. One of the things and proposals some people have said is, can we turn to outside accounting firms to do the normal audits, and you use DCAA to audit the auditors and make sure they're following the right processes and procedures that would perhaps be more efficient. So people have begun to look at that. I would submit to you the key item there is what's the right threshold level. I think it's back to that spending millions to chase the pennies that's really exacerbating and causing the imposition of the people. You don't want to eliminate them, right? They have a legitimate role to play. It's at what level.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yes. So there's a number of perspectives. One that has been interesting is, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln that said, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 hours, sharpening my axe. Very often, the oversight sometimes comes down to, well, they've had 25% growth. Let's have the GAO report. Let's have DCA. Let's have DCMA. Let's have the hearings. But perhaps another possibility is spending more time getting it right up front and focusing on the requirements, because oversight very often is after the costs have gone 25%, now you have the non-McCurdy requirements to go through another milestone and notify Congress and have the Secretary of Defense certify that this is required. So sometimes getting it right up front, programs that start off right generally, statistically, do much better on cost, schedule, and performance later on. So that's another possibility.
We could explore this more, but I would need to move on to another question for the sake of time. Overseeing service contracts versus the purchase of weapons or other tangible goods, are there any differences there in approach that you would recommend? Like in my district, you have everything from trash removal to operating shooting ranges to managing satellites. Any advice there?
Well, for a start, I would say that service contracting, there are different kinds of services, and you just pointed that out. You've got brain work, which counts as service contracting. You've got the guy who comes in and does his old job in the Pentagon but now has a different badge. It's called butts and seats in French. That's services. And then there's collecting trash. That's services. I think what you need to do is recognize that the real problem is the second one that I was talking about. You've always got to collect the trash, and you want people to use their brains. But Mr. Gates pointed out that what they call staff augmentation, the guys coming in and doing the government's work, doing the civil servants' work, that's gotten totally out of hand. And there is where I would look. I think we can cut back significantly. We're not spending half of our money. We're spending more than half of our money on services contracting. And considering the number of weapons that continue to drop each year with procurement, I'd like to see more of that money going from service contracting to hardware, frankly.
Okay. Mr. Francis?
Yes, services are quite different. So the people that write requirements are not your standard requirements organizations. They're bases. They're local places, people not necessarily well-versed in writing requirements. Services occur very quickly. A weapon system could take 10 or 15 years. A service is a level of effort that's done in months or a year. In weapons, dollars are a good proxy for risk. Something big and expensive probably involves risk. It's not the same for services. Some of your highest risk services, like Dove had mentioned, or interrogators in Iraq, are not high dollar. And some of the high dollar things, which are buying a high volume of low risk things, that's not necessarily what you need to be looking at. So I think the model for services has to be really front-end loaded. You have to triage the requirement to see what we're buying and why we're buying it. Because with services, once you buy it, it becomes a drug. Then we keep that service over time, and we don't go back and look. So I think it's quite different oversight regime.
Thank you all.
Ms. Songus.